former President Barbara Mabeki, and other distinguished delegates, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here and be part of very engaging conversations that we've been hearing today. And I must begin by first thanking the Tobacco Mabeki Foundation and ORF for setting up this forum where we can engage in these conversations. And while we have spoken or heard a lot today about a plethora of issues, particularly related to the Global South, I think one of the aspects we need to now engage in is about our physical environment, and that's how our cities are poised in the 21st century. And while we are in this beautiful city of Cape Town, we cannot but remember that just a couple of years ago, this is a city which was running dry completely on water, one of the basic necessities for our existence. And the city that I come from, New Delhi, right now as we speak, has turned into a horrific gas chamber where the air quality index has reached a level which has actually gone beyond any scale of measurement. And that's where New Delhi is headed. So in this kind of a situation, I think it's very important for us to engage in these conversations about our cities and their future. So I'm going to start with Mariana. Your thoughts about what you see as urban future for the Global South, and what is it that we can actually learn from each other, our shared experiences that can come to the fore in solving some of the issues that are plaguing our cities.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It is a great pleasure to represent Plataforma Cipó and to join the discussions today on urban futures in Global South. I think this is a $1 trillion question, and we have a hard task here to keep you awake and paying attention 7:30 p.m. But thank you very much for the invitation. So, I'll start by saying that why this discussion is so important. Urban areas are in the front line of climate change, and that's it in the intersection of some of the most critical issues that we are facing nowadays globally, such as, for example, urban development, climate adaptation, and sustainable growth. When we look to urban areas, more than 50% of the global population nowadays lives in urban areas. When we think about 2050, more than 70% of the global population will be living in urban areas. Looking to Latin America, where we come from, more than 80% of the population already lives in urban areas. So this is why we can say that the local level is where we have the main problems, and also the main solutions are based there at local levels. So I'll start by, when we look to the urban futures, thinking about your question, we cannot speak about urban futures without speaking about four main topics, which are climate and development financing, social justice and inclusion, multi-level and multi-stakeholders approach, and connecting local actions to global solutions, also having in mind the needs for localized priorities. So when we speak about the Global South, we usually speak about as if it was a unique entity, which is not. So of course we have old problems and shared challenges that we still are facing. For example, when we look to the impacts of rapid urbanization, the socio-economic disparities, and so on. The list is enormous. However, we need to have in mind that although we have several shared challenges, we also have main specific needs and also priorities. So what has changed if we are talking about old problems? What is the difference? What are we talking about now? The main difference is the urgency and the financial burden of the climate change impacts. This is what is different now, and this is something for us to discuss here. And I'll starting by the first topic that I mentioned about climate and development financing. Why this is so important, why this is a critical question to think of who will or should pay the bill. So when we look to the global north, we know that around 70% of the historical emissions come from the global north. So, and that means that although the developing countries are not the most, the most responsible for the crisis that we are in today, they are the most impacted ones. So this is a question that it's critical for us when we talk about urban futures. We cannot talk about urban futures without talking about climate and development financing. And this is even more crucial when we look to developing countries, because besides all the climate action agenda, we also have basic needs that needs to be fulfilled that we haven't get there yet. So, for example, energy, accessibility and affordable housing, and so on. So closing infrastructure gaps that we still have. So this is why this is central for the debate when we think about urban priorities.
So Mariana, in this, while you've laid out the broad framework of what urban futures in the global south are facing today, I'm going to ask you, Sebastian, what do you see in a situation where the geographies are varying across the global south, the economic realities are before us, and Mariana just mentioned about the challenges also of what cities face or what our local governments face about financing, urban financing, and the climate issues that we all are also very well aware of. Where do you see the urban development goals moving in this direction?
First of all, thanks to everyone involved in organizing this and take all these people here. Well, addressing your question, Dikshu, and what Mariana is talking about, I come from Chile, and we have a very diverse geography, and our country, it's a kind of laboratory for different urban development. We have, in the north of our country, we have the driest places on the earth. This is the Atacama Desert. And on the contrary, on the south, we have the Patagonia, that is one of the most dense native forests in the earth. And we need to adapt and tailor urban strategies for this geographic diversity. How do we do that? There is like many manual protocols books. We think that it's enough of that. We have to take action with these manuals and take this to the specific situations. I will tell about two examples. In the Atacama Desert, how do we develop urban strategies? We have to provide water. This is the most important thing when you are habitating this place. And the solution is very simple. It's simple to say, right? But it's not a technology that does not exist. It's the salinization of water to provide potable water to all those cities and watering some of the public spaces that you have around the city. It's not that difficult to think that getting water from the ocean you will be able to develop the cities in the arid, in the more driest places in the earth. And on the contrary, you have the Patagonia area we share this with Argentina and Chile. How do we make urban strategies for that? Probably the most important active in this place of the earth is the native forest. Then how do we develop cities or increase the areas of the cities in a place like this? Probably it's be careful to preserve this nature, considering that this is the most important active that we have now in the earth, considering the climate change and climate conditions. If we need to make more resilient cities or urban strategies, we have to think locally for what we are developing in those places.
So I think that's very interesting when you talk about think locally, because on the one level, if we see our cities, be it in Chile, Brazil, India, Indonesia, South Africa, and so on, across global South, the challenges faced are very similar. And yet, the idea of engaging with local communities, I think, is something which is very important and has been part of even the SDGs. And I remember this morning when Minister Sharma mentioned this statistic, astounding statistic, that only 17% yet has been achieved of the SDG goals, which are actually meant to be 100% achieved by 2030. So I'm going to ask you, Mariana, about how can we have these UN SDG goals really now fast-forwarded towards meeting the success that they had to. And for that, how can we engage with local communities to make this happen?
So the first thing, when we look to the SDGs, although it's a universal framework, the first and main issue we need to think about localizing the SDGs. So to make sure that this light is so strong, sorry, so that we adapt, we make sure that the global solutions that we have are adapted at local level. So that means to have targets and local indicators, first of all, to track on this, and to engage local communities, and especially the most vulnerable ones, are key in this process. We are not going to get there if we truly don't engage the local communities and the most affected ones. And there are several methodologies and tools to do this nowadays. The UN, we can think of, for example, they have the ESG forums. They also have the budget participatory process. So there are several ways of achieving it to make sure that the public policy, they reflect the needs and the voice of the most needed and also the most vulnerable ones. So without it, we are not going to get there. The other thing is, again, about the financing. So when we see, it's not only about how much we are talking about, the quantity, the amount of the resource, but also the quality of these, and how, especially local governments and cities, how they can access. When we think about Global South, the vast majority, I would say, of local communities and local governments, states and local and municipalities, they don't have the capabilities, the technical knowledge, for example, to assess these funds that we have in place nowadays. When we look to multilateral development banks, for example, they do have some financing tools and mechanisms, but how do we make sure that the cities and the state government, so we are talking about the local level, how do we make sure that they can access this? And the first thing is about technical knowledge. So the South-South cooperation plays a key role here, because as we already spoke, we do have several challenges that we shared, and we also have great solutions and best practice to be shared. And this is something that we need to better explore.
I agree with you. And one of the things that is generally spoken about a lot is that the policies that are made at the local government level, how much do they actually end up engaging with the communities? How much do they have the technical skill to be framing those policies? Because if the policy goes awry, the results of implementation are bound to go in the wrong direction. So from that point of view, I think there is a lot of opportunity to see and seek and share knowledge between the Global South, the cities. I'm going to move to one of the other very pertinent aspects, I think, cities across the globe which they are facing is about climate change. And as a result, how can we create climate resilient cities? Because today, across the world, across geographies, you find that there is always issues about climate change and how perishing the results are. So I'd like to know from you, Sebastian, how do you see the aspects of learning that can take place within Global South? Because for long, we have followed examples from Western nations or the Global North, and not necessarily those solutions today can be applied to cities in the Global South. The context has changed, Frankly, the climate and its challenges have changed. So how do you see that?
Well, first of all, we have to think that in Spain, a few weeks ago, they get flooded. It's not only on the global south what the problems with the climate change that we're facing. And some months ago, US always suffered another storm, and future President Trump said the resilient infrastructure is not necessary here, it's very expensive, right? And if we take these issues that I guess are the same issues, but to the global south, we have to think with the nature in the cities, not against the nature. Then again, I will go up with some examples that we have in this case in Santiago and probably in many other cities or cities where you live. What do you do with the flood management? Today, one of the main problems in the city, how do you manage the rainwaters? We will have many intense events of rains. In Brazil, you know better than us. In India, it's almost the same. How do we manage these water storms? And probably use the public space as a way to make resilient infrastructure that manage this water with the public space, like a kind of sponge city that you can retain this water, wait the rain stop, and then you start to manage this water. Could be a good way to solve this problem, right? And on the same time, you overlay another layer of the city that is public space that will engage communities in some places in common. And another example that I guess it's very interesting, in Chile we have a very strong earthquakes. We lived 14 years ago an 8.8 earthquake. I guess is the most intense earthquake that have been measured in the earth since there's measures, right? And there is a small town, Constitution, in the central zone that was not devastated because of the earthquake. It was devastated because of the tsunami that came after the earthquake. And this is probably a good example where the private sector, there was a main forestry company that provide probably 90% of the job position for this town, and also the public sectors that come along with a strategy of redesign this city, but protect for future events. And then they use or consider the forest, for instance, as a way to mitigate new waves in the future, and start to plan that city or redesign that city with these considerations. This is, I feel, different tools that we can use in the entire global south and maybe in the north or the global north or in every country to face these kind of challenges.
That's true, but you know, a lot of times we hear when you speak about infrastructure for cities, the first thing that comes on people's mind is, where does the money come from? How do you make sure that there's urban financing? In that situation, there's a lot of discussion on public-private collaboration. Where can the public-private partnership come forward to transform our cities? So what do you feel about it, Mariana? How do you see this? Do you, first of all, see this as a viable model? And if so, how do you think it can really be put in place generally across cities in Global South?
Definitely. So the challenge that we have are extremely complex, and we need everyone in the table. First of all, working together and in partnership. The other thing that I wanted to raise is that the solutions are already there. So it is crucial, and for sure that the private sector, they have a crucial role to play when we look to urban transformation and partnerships between public and private sector. We can look for technology, innovation, and also access to universal service as well, which is quite important, looking to, for example, water supply and so on. But there are, besides the public and private partnerships, also a very interesting experience that we have, for example, in Brazil from local governments. We have several consortiums of state governments that are working together to exchange and also to exactly what you said. So they are bringing together the experience and also the lessons learned from different weather extreme that they have been through, the different states, and sharing knowledge and how they can work together. So also another interesting that I just remember, it's in the state government of Espírito Santo. They have royalties from oil, and the governor, they are using this money to create a fund where they are supporting all the municipalities of the state to start their adaptation plans, which is quite innovative and using the resource that is currently coming from fossil fuels to make this change to a green economy.
So there are many innovative examples out there. You know, this kind of a session about our cities, I would have imagined Samir would have given us 2 hours to talk about it, but he's planted a time bomb in front of me, which is ticking away. So I'm going to just ask for very quickly your closing thoughts, comments, and then we'll open it to the audience about the future of our cities, and how can this urban future for the global south, what in your closing comments would you say is the direction forward? So we'll go with you first, Sebastian.
Okay, thanks. Well, considering that urban areas are under a really huge pressure because of the opportunities that urban areas presents, we have to take advantage of the rural areas. How do we plan these rural areas? Those are constellations of small towns or medium-sized cities. Take advantage of this. Probably we have to put eyes on these places, but thinking a kind of development that preserve the nature in cases where the nature is like an active for tourism, for preserve, temperature, or whatever. And on the other side, preserve agricultural land. It will secure us to have food for the future, right? Even when now we can produce meat that is not meat or milk that is not milk, but we need that land for produced food. This is one thought. And another that I think it's more broad, in the city there is a lot of money. Resources will come. I think that the key issue here is the coordination of that resources come to the right place, and not twice or third, just one time, and make it good. It's not about money, it's about coordination. And this is related to the government or the state and thinking a long-term vision for the city, not just for the period you are managing the country, 4 years, 6 years, it depends on the countries. And I think those are like final thoughts from my point of view.
Maria.
So we cannot think of urban futures without thinking of adequate financing, also to make sure that we truly put people in the center of public policy. We are not going to get there if we truly are not be able to do this, engage local communities and especially the most vulnerable ones. And the third one is, as you mentioned, it's about coordination. And this is really hard when we think about that we need an approach at multi-level, and also multi-stakeholders are all seated in the table. So these are the main takeaways. And I would say, just to conclude, that cooperation and partnership has a key role here, especially the South-South cooperation, where we have so much to learn and exchange.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I am also a very strong proponent of the fact that urban migration is one of the aspects we need to really look at. Because how much can we allow our cities to expand and then go about trying to solve problems? So what you mentioned about a balanced rural development as well, or outside the city development, is one of the big solutions. And of course, engaging communities. Who knows their problems better than the people themselves? So why not engage with them, involve them in problem solving? And what we all agree about is this cooperation between cities across global south, because we all are facing the same problems, and if only we can communicate with each other, we have solutions there to share with each other. So I think great points of conclusion there. I'm going to now open it up to the audience for questions or comments, if any. I'm sure people here feel for their cities, are concerned about their cities, and have ideas about them.
Dikshu, can I pose a question to the panelists, please?
Sure, please.
I'm
Go ahead,
Sameer
sir.
Saran. I work at the Observer Research Foundation. Quick question. You spoke about local communities, but there is also local indigenous knowledge of built environments. Some could argue that some years ago, centuries ago, we were perhaps more in sync with the places, with geographies we lived in than we are today because of the mass infrastructure designs that have now proliferated the planet. So my question to you is, how do you build capabilities and how do you build a new breed of architects, designers, and a construction industry that actually take forward indigenous knowledge and build the 21st century world?
Great question. Sebastian, would you like to respond to that?
Maybe start you first.
Sure, absolutely. No, I think one of the big lessons for all of us to first imbibe lesson 101 is that vernacular knowledge and vernacular solutions, which have existed over, like Sameer just said, centuries. But somewhere, I think, particularly in the 20th century, we have become very arrogant as a civilization. And we felt that whatever were solutions in the past were literally passé, and we need to invent solutions and impose those solutions on communities. And I think that's not worked so well. I mean, I give this example often about the minister just mentioned in her address right now about getting stuck in Cape Town traffic. Now, that's one thing I feel you can travel anywhere in the world, in any city, and we all face the same problem. And that's because we have actually ended up finding that the private vehicle, our car, is the only way of commute in cities, which is obviously not the best sustainable solution. So like this, I think the problems are self-created, and we are looking for solutions which are not vernacular, as Sameer just posed. Sebastian, would you like to comment further?
Yeah, just to add something to this, we need to consider the participatory process in the beginning of the projects, because many times in public tender, specifically, we found that the participatory process is just a way to validate what the state or the government or the authority want to do in some place, maybe for make and cut the line to take the picture. But if we don't consider that from the origin, you won't be able to validate those proposals, those urban projects, in the place where it will take action, that it's in the community. And then I feel that a well-driven participatory process on the origin of the project should be mandatory for every public project. Not all the projects, maybe, but every public project, look for those solutions that I come again with the concept, it's think locally. They have the solution. Many times people have the solution, not technical.
Absolutely. Any more questions there? Yeah, if you'd like to just walk up to the mics, please, on either end.
So it's said if the 19th century was a century of empires, the 20th century was a century of nation states, the 21st century is really going to be the century of cities. I'd like to know from you all if you could pick some best practices and cities that you feel are really exemplary examples of urban futures, and what features of those cities are that you could highlight with us and share with us.
Excellent question. Either of you, would you like to answer that, Mariana? In your experience, where do you see any cities that come to your mind as best practice, or cities from where we can imbibe certain aspects?
I think we don't have one city with one best practice. We have several cities with several best practice, and that's what we need to look at. So when thinking about cities and local governments, this is why it's so important to understand that, again, although the challenges are shared among us, we do have specificities, but the solutions are already there. What we need to do is technical cooperation, which is really hard to do it properly. And I mean South-South cooperation, global South cooperation. So it doesn't come to my mind like one example of city, but several. It depends. When we look to education, to, I don't know, to waste systems, and there are several examples. And also in Brazil, as I mentioned, we are having several experience with, it's not cities, but local governments, state governments working together from consortiums to exactly for this, to exchange knowledge and work together in the same challenge that they are facing.
Sebastian.
I think it's not, I agree with Mariana, it's not about one city as an example. I feel that it's about initiative in different cities. And nowadays, we're facing many like sport games like that are globally. And World Cup here in South Africa, like 20 or 12 years ago, what happened with this infrastructure today? Or in Rio de Janeiro, with the Olympic Games, what happened with this infrastructure? Millions of dollars used for just 1 or 2 months. What could you do with this today? Then, again, I come up with some examples. In Chile, we host the Pan American Games for 2 months. We need to host like 5,000 sport teams for different countries. And we build up social housing that in the first stage was used for sport teams, and after this was part of social housing that the state gave to many families, 1,000 families. And this project was a way to consider the public infrastructure with dual uses. First, one use, after, or in the second stage, another use. And all this money was used to improve the city, not for build up new infrastructure that after the games, we will not be able to support or maintain this infrastructure. Then those are initiatives, more than cities. I feel that are initiatives, because even in the best city of the world, if for you it's somewhere, there are going to be many issues. It's about initiatives, and how can you coordinate those initiatives?
So I think in that respect, conversations such as this at least can be the beginning for engaging us and for initiating where probably other initiatives can then develop into programs, policies, and then the sharing of knowledge, like we are talking about, can actually go about helping in shaping our cities in the 21st century, as Vanshika just mentioned, the century for cities, that we can actually create more livable communities. So we could carry on with these conversations, but time's certainly up. But I would urge you to keep thinking about this issue, because really where we live, where we exist, should be at the core of our hearts and our value systems, and that's the only way we'll find the right, honest solutions to it. So thank you very much, and I once again appreciate the organizers.